our co-host and executive producer of the Community Profile. Sandy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
If you would please introduce our guest, and we'll tell the folks what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, it's my pleasure to have Darrell Harkey with us today. Darrell's been with us before, and on the phone, I watched him do the weather this morning. So, Al Conklin from WBTV, and it's always good to have Al with us. So, thank you, Al, for joining us.
Oh, good morning. My pleasure. Good to talk to y'all, Sandy, Milton, Darrell.
Yeah, good to have you with us today, both of you, Al and Darrell. Our topic today is, of course, the 70th anniversary coming up. 70th anniversary of the of D-Day, the invasion of the beaches at Normandy, and that actual anniversary will be Friday, the 6th of June. But I heard Al and Darrell talking here before we went on the air. It almost was a day earlier, but there was a little bit of concerns with the weather of all things, Al, that pushed it back another day, I guess.
Well, it was one of those pivotal forecasts where, and keep in mind, we still sometimes get forecasts wrong, and here it is 2014. So, you're talking about 70 years ago and the technology that they had, but they knew enough, the meteorology staff knew enough that the weather was not going to be good on the original planned date, which was the 5th of June. And while everybody was ready, they wound up going on the 6th, where they saw a small window of opportunity to get these fellows over there and also have the support from the air, and it actually turned worse right after it. So they did have a window of opportunity. They took advantage of it, and it wound up working out, ideally. Of course, the seas were rough, but in terms of sky cover and rain and that type of thing, it was good enough for them to get in there and get the support that they need to get on the beach and get the job going.
Yeah, I'll let either one of you answer this question. We all know of D-Day. We all know we can see the pictures in our head of the soldiers coming ashore. Excuse me. But Darrell or Al, whoever wants to answer this question, why D-Day? Why was this such an important strategic maneuver and such a big operation by the armies, the Allies during World War II? What was so important about doing this mission?
Well, this was actually the gateway into Western Europe, and also eventually led to the invasion across the Rhine River and into Germany itself. But the Atlantic Wall had Rommel had established under Hitler's orders a 2,400-mile fortification called the Atlantic Wall, and it was heavily fortified. But this was probably the most, if there was a vulnerable place, this probably was it, and probably also the least expected place to be attacked. In fact, Hitler thought they were going to attack across the Seine River, and that's what he thought this was a feigning of an attack, where the real attack was coming later, but this is where he was mistaken. Rommel had actually gone home to a birthday party.
Well, the other thing I was going to say, Darrell, was too. I don't think we can discount that. There are other reasons for doing it. As number one was that the Russians had applied a tremendous amount of pressure, always looking for a second front. Recall that they lost about 25 million in World War II, more than any other nation, probably as much as all the nations combined. And so they had always pushed for it. That was one thing. And the other thing was, too, that when you think about it, we all know how once World War II ended, the influence of the Soviet Union on Eastern Europe, had we not gone in, for all we know, Western Europe could have been just as much communist state as Eastern Europe. So we had to get in there not only to get the Germans out, but also to keep the Russians from going any farther west. And so there was lots of reasons why we had to do what we did. And, thankfully it did work out. And, as Darrell said, we got the beachhead, and that was our point of moving eastward into Germany and eventually end in the war, a year or so later.
Now, of course, the enemy, they were prepared. That was a well fortified stretch. Although maybe they didn't know it was coming at that moment, or did they know? How soon did they know the United States and Great Britain and the other allies were coming? How soon did they know an invasion was coming?
Well, when they saw it coming, they knew it was coming, but they didn't really know the full strength. They didn't know exactly what.
But they had they had fortifications. They had guns. They had they were. It was really a bloody scene.
But to your question, though, correct me if I'm wrong, Darrell, but Rommel was not even there at the time. He was back home with family, visiting family in Germany. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, he was. So they wasn't expecting it. No.
There was definitely an element of surprise there. They saw the weather forecast the same as everybody else and said, "Well, it's not coming this week, and let's take off and do what we want to do." Well, they were shocked, to say the least.
What what time of day did this occur?
6:30 a.m. in the morning.
6:30.
Yeah, first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The one question you didn't ask that a lot of people ask: why is it called D-Day?
Yeah, why D-Day?
D doesn't stand for anything. It's it was just called D-Day, and that every day thereafter was called D-Day +1, D-Day +2, D-Day +3, D-Day +4.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we determine the days.
Well, go figure that. Well, I honestly thought maybe it was disaster or something along that line.
It didn't stand for anything. It was just name. Actually, the code name was Operation Overlord.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
So Operation
and
Overlord.
Again, the pivotal part of that, as to when it would be, was that small window of weather. And I want to set the stage here too. Is that a lot of us go to Myrtle Beach or the Outer Banks, and we see the tide come in, the tide go out, and it may come up a foot or so. The tides in this part of the world are extreme, and so they had to factor in things like the stage of the moon, not just the storminess, but these are extreme tides here where it can fluctuate 6-8 feet, and so they had to have the perfect timing. The date had to be the day it was because of where the tide cycle was going to be at daybreak, and what the weather situation was going to be like. If they had rain, fog, and cloud cover more extensively than they did, they wouldn't have had any air support. And not to say that it was a walk in the park. The seas were still very rough, and thousands drowned, never made it ashore. Forget about the German bullets; they just never made it ashore because of the packs that they had. The 100-pound gear, and the Higgins boats had some trouble in some areas getting on shore. This is not a place that's an easy place to get into from the water, and so it was everything just came together for a very small window. And again, we think of June around here as pleasant weather. It's a different thing in the North Atlantic and going across the English Channel. It is never an easy time of it there.
Right, the tides are, as you said. And even in the Bay of Fundy, you may be familiar with this, the tides even rise 60 feet.
Yeah, that's right.
60 feet, as much as 60.
You mentioned the boats. Those were specially designed boats for this operation, were they not?
Right. There's a man named Higgins actually designed the boat, but that's where it got the name Higgins boats. But they were. They even had tanks that floated, tanks that had propellers on them that came ashore, and they had curtains over them. They'd drop the curtains off, and of course, and expose the tank. And to be honest, the Americans had over 2,000 aircraft. The Germans only had 2 or 3. So the aircraft was way in favor of the Americans. And the paratroopers that were dropped on the German lines were actually mannequins filled with explosives. And as soon as they hit the ground, they erupted in a ball of fire. And the Germans that ran up to try to capture the mannequins were burned alive. And it was there were thousands of them that was dropped.
Yeah.
And they were like 3 feet tall, but they exploded when they hit.
There was also, correct me if I'm wrong, and I can't remember exactly what I saw recently, but there's been a lot of specials on television about D-Day. There was a one particular diversion that included balloons in the shape of army tanks and so forth to draw the Germans' attention away from that area to they had a diversion. Was it in the Philippines or where am I? Do you recall what I've seen there?
Yeah, I think that started in the Civil War, where they didn't have cannon. They were called Quaker guns that they hauled out logs and painted them, and the enemy would look at the fortifications and see these hollow logs, and they were actually they thought they were cannon. They were called Quaker guns. Of course, they didn't fire, but yeah, they had.
There's some other diversions.
But yeah, there was. And specific to this, they had all sorts of dummy bases where they literally just had blow up tanks and blow up boats in other parts of England, as you say, to give a diversion to say, well, from flying over, we see this base, we figure they'll come from here and maybe head over to this part of France or something, or Belgium or Holland or somewhere else. So there was all sorts of manipulation and things like that just to try any sort of advantage that you could get to spread out the defenses, would be taken advantage of. But it's just one of those things that's just unbelievable when you think about the scope of it. And thank goodness some of these fellows are still able to get over there, because even the youngest ones now are approaching, if not in their low 90s. So it's not going to be very many more years where there just won't be too many more D-Day survivors that are able to go over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the world leaders at the time of the D-Day invasion. Of course, President Roosevelt, United States, Churchill, Great Britain. What were their? Of course, we know what their responsibilities and duties was, but who did they have out there in the field actually organizing all this? Like I said, it was a tremendous operation. Who were some of the generals and so forth?
Well, they had a lot of generals in the Patton, of course, and George Marshall, who was, and of course Eisenhower. Eisenhower was recognized for his talents, and he was promoted over maybe 100, 200 other generals, and given his rank, that actually ranked him, that they jumped over. One of the leaders on the beach there was Norman Dutch Coda, who had married Eleanor Roosevelt's cousin, so he was Franklin FDR's cousin by marriage, and he was actually in charge of the beach. And while they were pinned down by the Germans, he made several speeches there and gave the men some talks that that would maybe inspire them. And he said, "We are being killed on the beach. Let us be killed inland." And and had them to charge it, charged up and it had all the barbed wire, and it had these long pipes that they actually, one pipe had a torpedo end of the pipe, and the pipes were like 10 feet long, and they connected to each other, and from their positions behind the sand, they would connect these pipes with these torpedoes, and keep adding to the pipe and running them up to the barbed wire, and then they would explode them and blow the barbed wire up, and it would disintegrate the barbed wire, and that way they could get through the barbed wire and get into the into the hedgerows.
Yeah.
And the hedgerows were like 16 feet high, and they were and in the end of each hedgerow there was like a 4-foot gully, and those tanks could get in a position where they couldn't maneuver, and once a tank was in that position, the tank was be a sitting duck for the artillery, and especially the German panzers who were also there, and of course the American Sherman tanks were no match for the 75 millimeter panzers that had 3 inches of armor, and the Shermans just wouldn't shoot through them, and the Germans had a big advantage with the tanks. But later on, the Americans, someone came up with an idea to put like what I call hedge clippers, giant hedge clippers, and weld them on the front of the tanks, and they would go up to the hedgerows, and they would like giant hedge clippers, and they would and use them as bulldozers.
Wow.
And they worked on those like 24 hours straight, welding those on, and that eventually got them through the hedgerows.
Amazing.
And another maneuver that Rommel pulled was there's a couple rivers there, and he dammed up had those rivers dammed up flooded all the fields. And
Right.
and then when the American paratroopers came in, they landed in those fields with those packs, and they drowned in those fields. And
Right.
those should have been fields. Yeah.
Yeah, they were looking at maps, thinking that well, this is this is going to be a good area here. Well, everything had changed. Got to remember that the Germans had been there for years, and so pillboxes and all sorts of the landscape had changed dramatically by the time the Allied forces arrived. And so, as Darrell said, there was lots of confusion. Of course, they'd had ample time to take down all the road signs. Everything. So you can just imagine you're in a foreign country, you're being shot at. You don't have a clue where you're at. You're not supposed to be in water. You can just imagine the chaos on the ground.
Mm-hmm. What were the total number of casualties, and how many men were involved in the invasion in the beginning, and loss of life, et cetera?
Well, we know of over 4,000 that was killed, and that many or more wounded. And thanks to the corpsmen were there on the beach, and the corpsmen actually saved a lot of lives that ordinarily would. And they had blood transfusions and all that. And as a matter of fact, and the reason I mention that, my first cousin, Bobby Harkey, there's an article in 94 in the 50th anniversary, and they did a quarter page in the Shaw Observer on Bobby and being a hero. And then my friend Charles Urey wrote a three-page or three articles on a hometown hero, Bobby, and all the medals he received, how he was shot, and he was an advance scout. But he was within 100 yards or so of a corpsman when he got shot, and they administered to him. The only thing that actually saved his life, and he was shot, in the stomach, and he actually killed the German, or a couple of Germans that shot him, that they stepped at. And he was so close to the German lines that he had a radio, and the Germans would actually talk to him in English. And Bobby was only about 5'3" or 5'4", and they called him Short Step. And they actually even talked to him on his radio.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. Go ahead, Sandy.
My uncle was in Normandy and was wounded. And growing up, he would always tell us about, he still had shrapnel, in his body. And he could really tell us some more stories. Of course, he cushioned it down telling kids, the stories of it. But I grew up hearing about D-Day, and he certainly was proud to be a soldier and fight for our country like he did.
Yeah. Another one was Anzio, which was actually larger than the D-Day, Anzio beachhead in Italy, but it didn't get the notoriety of all that D-Day had gotten.
Well, after D-Day and all of the aftermath, how long was it until the Germans surrendered? Hitler was no more. How long time are we looking at?
Well, it was in May of the next year, but this
Yes,
this
almost a year.
Yeah,
Okay.
they held out for a long time. Actually, the Russians got in Berlin and found Hitler's bodies before the Americans did. But after we crossed the Rhine River, the Germans tried to blow the bridge, and a guy from Lincoln, John Reynolds, was one of the men that was on that bridge that broke loose the explosives on the Rhine River, or the bridge at Remagen. And a German later said that if Reynolds didn't get the Congressional Medal of Honor, they ought to do away with it. But he was killed by a sniper a couple of weeks later, John Reynolds was. And the bridge over 321 is named John Reynolds Bridge. As you come into Lincoln from Boger City, you come over the John Reynolds Bridge.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yep.
As far now, the dead, they're buried. Where are they buried in the area?
There's
there?
a lot of. I've got pictures of all the cemeteries in France and Belgium, and the places where the American cemeteries are there. And there was one time some of the French had said they wanted the Americans out, and someone asked, "Does that include our graves too?"
Yeah.
Have either of you been there to visit any of the cemeteries?
I haven't. I've been to England, but I've never been to France.
No, I haven't been. I'd love to go sometime, though.
Well, again, we're talking with Darrell Harkey and Al Conklin with us today. Darrell here in studios, Al on the telephone. And Al, if we're keeping you from an appointment, I think you had somewhere you had to go this morning.
Well, I do at 10:30 here. I'm probably a minute or two behind, but I've got a meeting to go to with my pastor up here at Independence Hill Baptist in Charlotte and Huntersville. But I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed just listening, to be honest with you. But always enjoy speaking with y'all, and I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.
Okay.
Well, we appreciate it, Al, and maybe sometime you can come up here.
I'd love to, Sandy. I know you've always told me I got an invitation. I'll get there one of these days soon.
Well, we'll get Doug Mays up with us.
Oh,
There we go. That'll sound great.
We'll just have a historical party.
Thank you, Al.
Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Al. You too.
All right. So he had a meeting he had to get to, and we were keeping him from that, Darrell. But just so much so much more you can go in depth on D-Day, the planning, the actual invasion, the aftermath, the loss of life, the technology that went into it, like you said, the improvising of weapons in the middle of the battle to cut through the hedgerows, something I hadn't heard about, and just quite amazing. Just an unbelievable turn of events that shaped the world as we know it today, and what might have been had it not gone the Allies' way. What?
Well, we just simply outproduced, as Yamamoto said, or was supposed to have said, I feel all we've accomplished here today is to awaken a sleeping giant filled with great resolve. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happened to the South in the war between the states. The northern states just outproduced them, and we've always been able to the resolve in our men in the Revolutionary War. The British didn't count on the resolve in these people. They were fighting for their homes,
and will to win.
And these people, were fighting to keep these people from attacking America.
Yeah,
and that meant a lot. And one thing they didn't have to worry about was their wives and families back home, because they knew they were being taken care of, because the communities came together so much that the ladies made socks and darn socks and sent all kind of packages and stuff to them, and they knew they had the support on the home front, and that meant a lot to the soldiers too. That was something they knew they had.
And at that time, you had this country, this great country, and its great people. They were fighting two enemies, in Germany and Japan. I mean, they were, even though the Germans surrendered, there was still another war to finish some years later with Japan.
Yeah, I was curious one time, and I did some research, and I was curious, did more Americans lose their lives in Europe or in the Far East? And by far, Europe, we lost more American soldiers through the Germans than we did the Japanese. But we somehow, I don't know, I don't want to get into anything racial, but it might have been racial that we seem to have treated, of course, the Japanese didn't treat us very well, and the Germans treated us, our prisoners of war, not that it was good, and it wasn't like Hogan's Heroes, but the American prisoners in Germany were treated much better than they were in Japan, but we also treated the Germans much better. German prisoners were brought actually to Georgia, and at the end of the Civil War, there was 90,000 Confederate uniforms in a warehouse that had never been worn, wool uniforms. That was never given out to Confederate troops, 90,000. And German prisoners wore those Confederate uniforms as a prisoner of war uniform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I realized that.
Yeah, 90,000 of them. And I don't know how many uniforms they wore, but those uniforms are still intact and still packaged. But the German prisoners wore those.
Wow.
Well, I've wondered about Hitler. I've heard several stories about did he commit suicide? Did one of his generals or someone under him kill him? I never was really clear on exactly what happened to him.
Supposedly, Eva Braun they were married sometime before, right there at the end, and they went in, and he had a bunker and committed suicide, and the Russians got the body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's in April of 45.
All right. Well, so much more we could talk about, but we're only limited in a little bit of time here. So, Darrell, thank you so much for coming in.
Yes,
the 70th anniversary, of course, is Friday, 70th anniversary of D-Day, and I know there may be some events planned and some remembrances planned, but if you don't plan to attend anything in particular, just plan to take a moment and reflect back on what these great Americans and citizens of other countries that were fighting with America to defeat this awful power that was trying to accomplish world domination at the time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there were Canadians and British also fighting at the Five Beaches, Sword and Juneau and Gold, and Omaha and Utah, and they had a rough time, but you don't want to say they had it easy. Nobody had it easy in war, but it wasn't like Omaha. And Bernard Montgomery was in charge. Actually, was in charge of all those forces there on the beach, and there was always some friction between Monty and Ike, and Ike pulled him out of the fire a couple times, especially in North Africa, and there was also a little bit of friction between the commanders, and Montgomery was a little bit jealous. Of course, who's to say, given the same situation that we might have been ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you can look back, it just seems like the right people were in the right place at the right time for it all to go,
Well,
our way.
We don't hear much about George Marshall, but he was, in charge of that Berlin airlift when they sent all the food in, when they landed all the planes with all the food for feeding the people, and he was one of the masterminds behind a lot of stuff, and even though he wasn't in the field like Patton and Eisenhower and some of the rest of them was, and Omar Bradley, but he was a brilliant mind and a graduate of VMI University, and later on was chief of staff and all. But the right people came together, and in promoting Eisenhower over 200 other generals that had rank, and it's maybe a political move, but it was the right move at the right time.
Yeah. Well, Darrell, thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it. And our thanks to Al Conklin as well, who had to leave for an appointment this morning. But that's our program today on the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And Sandy, that's our community profile programs for the week now.
Yes, and I've got 3 pending next week, and I'll let you know Monday morning.
Okay. Folks, tune in Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays for the community profile right here on Big O Country and KTC Broadcasting. This program can be viewed on our website. You can go to YouTube/KTC.com and view today's program from the studio camera if you wish. We'll see you next time.
America.
It's a free country.
And we're proud to be in the land of free radio. Thanks for supporting our fee-free station.
Big O Country, WOHS.